History's most inbred women, the dark side of royal bloodlines. What truly lies hidden behind the glamour and power of ancient thrones? For centuries, some royal families defied all devastating consequences just to keep their bloodlines pure, leading to troubled minds, weakened bodies, and genealogies distorted by generations of inbreeding. Today, we will uncover the darkest stories of royal women who bore the greatest tragedies from this obsession. Prepare yourself, because when you meet the most inbred woman in history, you will surely be stunned. Isabella II of Spain, reigned 1833 to 1868. We will begin this list with Isabella II of Spain, a figure whose life and reign are the clearest symbol of the devastating consequences of royal inbreeding. Born in 1830, Isabella was the result of a relationship that today we would consider extremely disturbing. The marriage between an uncle and niece. But that's not all. According to historical records, her paternal and maternal grandparents were also her great-grandparents. Imagine the overlap in this genealogy. At the age of 16, Isabella was forced to marry her double second cousin. This marriage painted a picture of deep complexity and unhappiness in her personal life. Throughout her life, Isabella became pregnant 11 times, an astonishing number. However, a harsh reality is that only 5 of her children survived to childhood. Given the proven degree of inbreeding, such a high infant mortality rate is not surprising, suggesting a high probability of genetic complications. Beyond personal and genetic tragedy, Isabella's reign was plagued by scandal. Many historians questioned the identity of her children's biological fathers. They believed that none of those children were her husbands. This not only implies a deeply complex and unhappy marriage, but may also have been influenced by rumors about her husband's sexuality, who was suspected of being homosexual. All these factors contributed to the downfall of Isabella's reign, and she lost her throne. What do you think was the greatest tragedy in Isabella's reign? Was it the burden of genetics, or the misfortunes in her personal and political life that pushed her to the brink of collapse? Marie-Louise of Austria. From the Spanish throne, we move to another equally heartbreaking story, Marie-Louise of Austria. Her life is also a powerful testament to personal sacrifice for political and genetic gain. Marie-Louise's parents were double first cousins, meaning they shared both sets of grandparents. This created an extremely high degree of inbreeding from her birth. She was the eldest of 12 children, but a harsh reality is that only 7 of them survived to adulthood. High infant mortality in royalty was not uncommon, but in the context of such deep inbreeding, it becomes even more remarkable. Marie-Louise's level of inbreeding was truly astonishing. She had only 4 unique great-grandparents compared to the usual 8 for an average person. This is described as the kind of genetic compression that scientists today only see in highly isolated populations. Imagine the narrowing of the gene pool and the potential genetic risks it entailed. At the age of 18, Marie-Louise faced another tragic fate. She was forced to marry Napoleon Bonaparte, her father's sworn enemy. This marriage was not for love, but a cruel political move to secure peace and hopefully a male heir for Napoleon's empire. Imagine the burden on those young shoulders. A young girl, perhaps already bearing unseen genetic burdens, had to bear the additional pressure of becoming a political hostage and the wife of one of history's most powerful and feared figures. Her life was a series of tragedies from birth to adulthood. Lorraine Whitaker, modern inbreeding case. When we talk about inbreeding, we often think of European royalty in the Middle Ages or ancient times. But the story of Lorraine Whitaker is a chilling reminder that the shadow of inbreeding does not belong only to the royal past. It is proof that these cycles continue, not only in dynasties but also in hidden corners of the world, throughout human history. The Whitaker family gained notoriety through a documentary described as haunting. This film revealed a terrifying reality. This was a family that had experienced multiple generations of isolation and endogamous marriage. Lorraine is one of the most inbred individuals recorded in recent decades. She is not only a victim of circumstance, but also a link in a continuing chain of tragedy. Lorraine is the mother of Tiny Whitaker, who sources indicate is often considered the most inbred individual alive today. The story of the Whitaker family is a gruesome illustration of how these cycles still continue. It shows that inbreeding is not just a historical royal issue, but a human tragedy that repeats itself in places where isolation and lack of oversight can create unimaginable consequences. The story of the Whitaker family is truly thought-provoking. In your opinion, what kind of consequences can isolation lead to, not only genetically, but also socially and psychologically? Maria Anna, most inbred Habsburg royal. Returning to the European thrones, we meet Maria Anna, born on Christmas Eve 1634, was the daughter of Archduke Ferdinand of Austria and Maria Anna of Spain. Her mother was the daughter of King Philip III of Spain, making Maria Anna the product of two of Europe's most powerful royal families. However, this union was not just a strategic marriage, but also a marriage of blood. Maria Anna's parents were first cousins. This was part of the Habsburg dynasty's obsessive practice of inbreeding to keep power within the family, a tradition that lasted over a century. Initially, Maria Anna was intended to marry Balthazar Charles, Prince of Asturias and Girona, her first cousin, who was also the only son of King Philip IV of Spain from his first marriage. Although such a close blood relationship would be a major issue for many, for the Habsburgs, it was hardly an issue. An agreement was reached in 1646, but fate intervened. Balthazar Charles suddenly died in October 1646, possibly from smallpox, just weeks after his engagement and days before his 17th birthday. Balthazar Charles's death left Spain without a male heir, pushing King Philip IV into a crisis. His solution? A shocking proposal. Philip himself would marry Maria Anna. Incredibly, this arrangement was approved, and on October 7, 1649, Maria Anna, then only 14 years old, married her uncle who was 44. Maria Anna and Philip IV's marriage soon produced children. Their first child, Margaret Theresa, born in 1651, shared a similar fate to her mother. At age 14, she was sent to Vienna and married her own uncle, Leopold IV, who was also Maria Anna's biological brother. But the real tragedy began with their sons. After their first two children, Maria Ambrosia and Ferdinand Thomas, died in infancy, and Philip Prospero died in 1661. Only Charles, born in 1661, remained as the last hope for the Spanish throne. Margaret Theresa. The story of Margaret Theresa, a figure whose fate clearly reflects the horrific tragedies of inbreeding within the Spanish Habsburg dynasty. Imagine from the moment she was born in 1651, Margaret Theresa was the result of a marriage riddled with inbreeding. Her mother, Maria Anna, was born from a relationship between first cousins within the Habsburg family. This dynasty maintained an obsessive habit of inbreeding for over a century, all to keep power within the family. These non-stop marriages shaped Maria Anna's fate in unimaginable ways, and the price paid for this royal tradition was immense, leading to shocking and devastating consequences. The most bizarre and terrifying thing is that history gruesomely repeated itself for Margaret Theresa herself. At just 14 years old, like her mother, Margaret Theresa was sent to Vienna, Austria, and married her own uncle, Leopold I of Austria. Ironically, Leopold I was Maria Anna's biological brother. This was not just a political marriage, but a strangely fated repetition in the history of the Habsburg dynasty. But the most horrific consequence of this chain of inbred marriages did not stop with Margaret Theresa, but befell her younger brother, Charles II. To his contemporaries, he was known as El Hechizado, the Bewitched King, as many believed that his myriad physical and intellectual problems were the result of witchcraft. But the true cause was far more disturbing. Charles's condition was most likely the result of severe inbreeding, which had weakened the Habsburg bloodline over many generations. He likely suffered from a combination of genetic disorders, including hormone deficiencies, epilepsy, bone deformities, and more. This was no coincidence. Maria Anna had married her uncle, and both came from a dynasty that had practiced inbreeding for centuries. Charles's inbreeding coefficient, a measure of the genetic similarity of a person's parents, was astonishingly high, with some estimates suggesting his genetic makeup was akin to a child born of full siblings. Charles's health deteriorated rapidly, and by the early 1690s, it was clear he would never have children. Maria Anna died in 1696 at the age of 61, after years of political struggles and failed attempts to secure Spain's future. Her lifelong work to preserve the Habsburg dynasty ultimately failed. On November 1st, 1700, Charles II died at the age of 38, and with his death, the Spanish Habsburg dynasty came to an end. The dispute over the succession to the Spanish throne sparked a full-blown war, the War of the Spanish Succession, which erupted in 1701 and lasted 13 years. This war involved most of the major powers in Europe. Maria Antonia of Austria. We will now turn to one of the most frightening cases of inbreeding in history, often overshadowed by her infamous uncle Charles II of Spain. But in reality, Maria Antonia of Austria was much more inbred. She is a clear example of how twisted a royal genealogy can become. Maria Antonia's family tree was not a normal tree, but a dense, tangled bush, even likened to a circle. This means that consanguineous marriage relationships repeated to the point where family branches overlapped. The source asserts that her inbreeding coefficient was higher than that of a child born of full siblings. Imagine the degree to which genes were compressed and repeated in her body. Maria Antonia was born in 1669, the result of a marriage between an uncle and his biological niece, to the extent that her mother even called her husband uncle. Given such a high degree of inbreeding, it was a miracle that Maria Antonia was born healthy and relatively normal, defying all predictions. She was considered the exception rather than the rule. Amazingly, she was her parents' only child to survive childhood in that deeply inbred marriage. As a potential heir to Austria and with a claim to the Spanish throne, Maria Antonia was placed at the center of one of Europe's most powerful and unstable dynasties. Her life was scrutinized intensely. Her father even used her portraits to promote his claim to the Spanish throne. At age 16, she married her second cousin, Maximilian II of Bavaria. However, this marriage was unhappy. Her husband was outgoing, fond of partying, and openly had mistresses while she was introverted and discreet. Maria Antonia also had difficult pregnancies, and 2 of her sons died at birth. In October 1692, she gave birth to a healthy son, Joseph Ferdinand of Bavaria. But tragedy struck again. Maria Antonia died of puerperal infection at age 23 on Christmas 1692. Her death opened up the issue of the Spanish succession, a problem that later led to the fierce War of the Spanish Succession. And sadly, her son, Joseph Ferdinand, who seemed to be a hope, later also died of smallpox. Maria Antonia's life was truly tragic. Which detail in her story haunts you the most? Maria I of Portugal, Maria the Pious, troubled. Maria the Kai of Portugal, often known by the nicknames Maria the Pious or Maria the Troubled. Born in 1734, she was famous not only for her position as queen, but also for her severe mental instability and profound inbred lineage. Maria's parents were King Joseph I of Portugal and Maria Ana Victoria of Spain. They were not just a regular royal couple, they were the 16th royal couple linked by consanguineous marriage between Iberian royalties. Imagine 16 consecutive generations of marriages within the family. This shows the extent to which these dynasties tried to maintain power and the purity of their bloodlines. At the age of 25, Maria continued the chain of inbred marriages by marrying her own uncle. The purpose was nothing less than to preserve the Braganza name. Unfortunately, the devastating consequences of inbreeding soon became apparent in her life. A heartbreaking fact is that half of her children died due to complications directly related to inbreeding. This once again shows the price paid for narrowing the gene pool. Besides the tragedies concerning her children, Maria's mental state gradually deteriorated over time, until she was no longer able to reign. The nickname Maria the Troubled says it all. Her life is a painful testament to how the obsession with power and bloodlines can destroy an individual, both physically and mentally. Marie-Louise Élisabeth d'Orléans. Continuing our journey of exploring royal tragedies, we come to Marie-Louise Élisabeth d'Orléans, a figure whose life is likened to a Gothic tragedy driven by dynastic pressure. From birth, she was the product of her father's unhappy marriage. Her father was forced to marry his legitimized maternal cousin, who was the daughter of Louis XIV. Political ties, not love, shaped her origins. And the tragedy did not stop there. Marie-Louise was then forced to marry her own cousin, Prince Charles of Berry. This overlapping relationship added another layer of inbreeding to her genealogy. The consequences of these marriages were not limited to Marie-Louise's personal life. A heartbreaking fact is that 3 of her children died at a very young age. This raises a big and haunting question. Was the early death of these children due to the burden of shared blood, i.e. the consequence of inbreeding, or due to Marie-Louise's own severe alcoholism, a habit she started at age 14? Sources do not provide a definitive answer, but raising this question shows the complexity and pain in her life. She was a victim of dynastic pressure, genetics, and perhaps even desperate personal choices. Princess Alexia of Greece, born 1964 or 1965. While most stories of royal inbreeding are in the distant past, Princess Alexia of Greece is a special case, representing one of the last royal marriages between a reigning monarch and a royal princess. Although born in 1964 or 1965, she still carries the legacy of generations of inbreeding. Princess Alexia's parents are Queen Anne-Marie of Denmark and King Constantine II of Greece. Their relationship? They are second cousins and double third cousins. This shows the repetition of family ties in European dynasties, even in the late 20th century. When looking deeper into their lineage, the picture becomes even clearer. In Constantine's lineage, his great-grandparents were siblings, and his paternal grandmother was his great-grandfather's sister. Similarly, Anne-Marie's lineage also has similar connections. Although sources suggest their love seemed genuine, the union of these close cousins undoubtedly resulted in partially inbred children. This is an unavoidable genetic reality, similar to the case of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. Mummies 317A and 317B, daughters of Pharaoh Tutankhamun. Leaving Europe, we travel thousands of years back to ancient Egypt to explore another inbreeding story, etched in ancient tragedy. These names may not be as familiar as European queens, but their story is incredibly powerful. Mummies 317A and 317B. These are not long-lived figures whose lives we can study in detail. Instead, they are stillborn or infant daughters of Pharaoh Tutankhamun and his wife Ankhesenamun, born around 1300 BCE. The discovery of these fetal mummies provided chilling evidence of the consequences of extreme inbreeding in ancient Egyptian royalty. The relationship between Tutankhamun and Ankhesenamun was far more complex than just husband and wife. Ankhesenamun was not only Tut's wife, but also his half-sister, and this is just a small part of the overall picture. Tutankhamun's lineage was tangled with generations of sibling marriages. Imagine the overlap of the Egyptian royal family tree, where marriage between siblings was not only accepted, but also the norm to preserve power and the supposed purity of the divine bloodline. With such horrifying levels of inbreeding, the genetic cost was simply too high for these infants to overcome. Their short lives were marked by deformities and weakness. The story of Mummies 317A and 317B is a reminder that in any era, from ancient civilizations to modern dynasties, the consequences of disregarding biological rules for political or religious gain are always heartbreaking tragedies, most clearly demonstrated through the fate of innocent children. Kimberly Colts, modern inbreeding victim. From glittering thrones and ancient tombs, we return to the modern world to confront a modern horror, the story of Kimberly Colts. To protect her identity, she uses a pseudonym, but her story is a vivid, painful testament to how the consequences of inbreeding are not just history, but are still ongoing. Kimberly Colts is said to be the most inbred person alive today. This indicates the severity and persistence of this issue in modern society. The Colts family became notorious in Australia for operating like a cult, committing unspeakable illegal and inhumane acts over many generations. These acts ultimately led to police raids and the imprisonment of family members. Kimberly Colt's story is a devastating living proof of the disastrous consequences of extreme multi-generational inbreeding outside the royal context. It is important to emphasize here that her story is not about royal pressure or dynastic pride, but a modern example of how isolation and lack of oversight can create unimaginable human costs. In this case, the isolation was not a voluntary choice to preserve royal bloodlines, but a vicious cycle of a forgotten society where dark behaviors could flourish and destroy many generations. This is a stark reminder that the tragedy of inbreeding does not belong only to the distant past or luxurious palaces. It can be hidden in the obscure corners of modern society, where a lack of care and isolation can create equally painful genetic and social tragedies. Cleopatra VII Philopator, legendary Egyptian queen. And now we have arrived at the woman who tragically takes the top spot on this list. Cleopatra VII Philopator, the legendary Egyptian queen. Cleopatra's image is often romanticized by Hollywood, with her captivating beauty and passionate love affairs. But forget that glamour, because Cleopatra's true story is a tale of relentless, calculated inbreeding to preserve power. She is the ultimate embodiment of power, but also the heavy biological burden of inbreeding. Cleopatra's bloodline, contrary to popular belief, was predominantly Greek Macedonian, belonging to the Ptolemaic dynasty. This dynasty established a horrifying tradition. They married brothers to sisters and uncles to nieces relentlessly to preserve power and pure bloodlines. This was not an exception, but the rule to maintain their position and power in a volatile world. Cleopatra's level of inbreeding was truly astonishing. Her parents were siblings. But not only that, her grandparents were also siblings, and even her own siblings married each other. This was an almost perfect genetic loop, where each generation deepened the narrowing of the gene pool, to the extent that even her name came from a rare Syrian princess, one of the few rare outsiders ever allowed into the family tree. This shows the closed nature and obsession with the purity of the Ptolemaic bloodline. Cleopatra VII was not just a product of inbreeding, she was the genetic culmination of generations of tightly woven lineage. She was a powerful, intelligent, and cunning ruler, but at the same time she bore the heavy biological burden from the calculated ambition of a family. Although sources do not go into detail about Cleopatra's specific health issues due to inbreeding, with such a complex genealogy, she certainly faced potential genetic risks, a silent price for her throne. Cleopatra's story is a powerful reminder that power often comes with a terrible price, and sometimes that price is paid with the health and genetic legacy of generations. Which of these stories surprised you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. The legacy of tragic bloodlines. The heartbreaking stories of the individuals mentioned in the list clearly demonstrate the devastating consequences that consanguineous marriages bring, along with the heavy legacy they leave behind for history and humanity. Firstly, in terms of genetics and health, the consequences are extremely severe. Extreme inbreeding led to broken minds, decaying bodies, and family trees twisted beyond recognition. A prime example is King Charles II of Spain, whose body was weakened from birth, with a host of horrible health problems, bone deformities, and a severely deformed Habsburg jaw that made chewing food difficult. The survival rate of children was also alarmingly low. Isabella II of Spain was pregnant 11 times, but only 5 children survived to childhood. Marie-Louise of Austria was the eldest of 12 children, but only 7 survived to adulthood. And Maria the Faye of Portugal witnessed half of her children die from complications directly related to inbreeding. 3 of Marie-Louise Élisabeth d'Orléans' children died at a very young age, while 2 of Maria Antonia of Austria's sons died at birth, and her only surviving son also died later. Individuals affected by inbreeding often suffered from congenital defects and fragile health, such as the 2 daughters of Pharaoh Tutankhamun with short lives marked by deformities and weakness, due to a lineage tangled with generations of sibling marriages. Furthermore, the astonishing degree of inbreeding, as in the case of Marie-Louise of Austria, having only 4 unique great-grandparents, compared to the usual 8, demonstrates the kind of genetic compression that scientists today only see in highly isolated populations. Maria Antonia's inbreeding coefficient was even higher than that of a child born of 2 full siblings. In addition, mental instability was also a serious consequence, clearly seen in Maria I of Portugal, whose mental state gradually deteriorated until she was unable to reign. Not limited to health issues, consanguineous marriages also brought tragic social and personal consequences. Many cases show complex and unhappy marriages, such as Isabella II, where many historians believe none of her children were her husbands. Marie-Louise. Élisabeth d'Orléans' life is described as a Gothic tragedy, and Maria Antonia had an unhappy marriage and died young from puerperal infection. The pursuit of pure blood and power led to forced marriages, sometimes between political enemies, as in the case of Marie-Louise of Austria, who was forced to marry Napoleon Bonaparte. Notably, in modern cases like the Whitaker and Colts families, isolation and multi-generational inbreeding led to unspeakable illegal and inhumane acts, operating like a cult, and police raids. This shows the unimaginable human cost that isolation and lack of oversight can create, proving that the shadow of inbreeding does not belong only to the royal past. Finally, looking at the legacy left by these tragic bloodlines, we see a powerful warning. These stories remind us that history is often shaped not only by politics or war, but also by the invisible hand of biology and blood. They are devastating living proof of the disastrous consequences of extreme multi-generational inbreeding. At the same time, we learn that the shadow of inbreeding does not belong only to the royal past, but is also a repeating human history in hidden corners of the world, showing how these tragic cycles still continue outside the royal context. Therefore, the legacy of these tragic bloodlines is a warning about the cost of the obsession to maintain power and pure blood, exemplified by Cleopatra's 7th Philopator, who, despite being a powerful ruler, also bore the heavy biological burden from the calculated ambition of a family. These stories, from glittering thrones to isolated camps, weave a complex and heartbreaking picture of the consequences of genetic and social choices. 30 circus freaks that actually existed, historical photos. Have you ever wondered what really went on behind the velvet curtains of old circus sideshows? Not the glamorized posters or exaggerated legends, but the real people. The human beings behind the titles like the half-boy, the bird girl, or the man with 2 heads. In an era long before modern medicine and inclusion, the world flocked to traveling shows not just for entertainment, but for curiosity. These weren't just performers, they were pioneers of survival, navigating a stage where applause and exploitation went hand in hand. From the triumphs to the tragedies, what you're about to hear isn't just history, it's humanity in its rawest form. Let's begin with a woman who didn't just perform. She fluttered, flapped, and turned herself into a living, breathing bird. Cuckoo, the bird girl. Born in Georgia in 1880, Minnie Woolsey was unlike anyone the world had seen. Living with Virchow-Seckel syndrome, a rare form of dwarfism often dubbed bird-headed due to its features, Minnie had a tiny frame, large eyes, and a sloping jaw. But where some saw strangeness, Minnie saw opportunity. She transformed herself into Cuckoo, the bird girl. Draped in feathery gowns and adorned with towering headdresses, she embraced a persona that was half human, half myth. Her movements were bird-like. Arms fluttered, feet danced, and her presence mesmerized. She became most famous for her appearance in Freaks, where her wild dance atop a banquet table left an eerie yet unforgettable impression. But that performance wasn't just spectacle, it was defiance. Minnie turned mockery into magic. Her routine walked the line between unsettling and captivating, forcing audiences to reckon with their own assumptions. Her later years remain a mystery, fading into the shadows like many sideshow stars. But the image of her dancing, bold and unashamed, remains frozen in film and in memory. The Two-Headed Man. History never gave him a name, but sideshow posters did. The Two-Headed Man was born with parasitic twins, a rare condition where an underdeveloped second head is fused to a living, functioning body. He became a must-see figure in early 20th century circuses. Some claimed the second head would twitch. Others said it whispered. But whether those tales were fact or fabrication, one thing is certain. He was never given full humanity in the eyes of the crowd. In truth, parasitic twins result from incomplete embryonic separation, a phenomenon as tragic as it is rare. But in the golden age of sideshows, scientific nuance gave way to eerie fascination. His life was not his own. He was a symbol, a legend, and an object of grotesque wonder. He vanishes from records, unnamed and unburied in the annals of public memory. A haunting reminder that while the crowd may cheer, it doesn't always care. From tragedy to triumph, our next performer didn't hide his transformation. He embraced it and became an icon of power. Daisy and Violet Hilton. Born in 1908 in Brighton, England, Daisy and Violet Hilton were conjoined twins, joined at the hips, sharing blood circulation but not organs. Their mother gave them up at birth. They were taken in by Mary Hilton, who saw not daughters but dollars. For decades, Daisy and Violet were marketed as a miracle. They learned to sing, dance, play instruments. They toured across Europe and America, performing in vaudeville acts and starring in films like Chained for Life. But behind the scenes, their lives were tightly controlled. Their earnings were taken. Their decisions were made for them. Only in adulthood were they able to break free and manage their own careers. Though they finally experienced moments of autonomy, their lives were marked by struggle. They died together in 1969 from the Hong Kong flu, their bodies discovered days later. They had shared a stage, a body, and a lifelong quest for freedom. Jo Martin Lorello. No special effects, no camera tricks. In the golden age of sideshows, Jo Martin Lorello had a trick up his neck, literally. Born in 1886, Lorello became famous for a talent that startled even hardened spectators. He could rotate his head a full 180 degrees. Yes, you read that right. Jo arrived in the US in 1921, and not long after joined the legendary Barnum and Bailey Circus, where he built a reputation as the Owl Man. He would walk across the stage with his head fully turned backward, grinning eerily at the crowd from over his shoulder. The act was silent, strange, and unforgettable. In 1940, Life magazine featured a photo of Lorello in mid-performance, a haunting image that made him a minor celebrity. Behind the scenes, Jo was quiet and disciplined. He rarely spoke about his condition, but medical experts suspected it stemmed from unusual vertebral flexibility and pain tolerance. He passed away in 1955, leaving behind a legacy of silent, contorted showmanship that still haunts sideshow lore today. From someone known for his twisting form, we turn now to the smallest performer ever recorded, proof that stature is no measure of stage presence. Pip and Flip. Next up are two sisters whose appearance sparked fascination, but whose spirit brought joy. Meet Pip and Flip, conjoined twin performers with microcephaly, a condition causing a significantly smaller head and developmental challenges. Billed as the twins of Yucatan, their origin was likely fabricated to make them seem exotic. Truth is, we still don't know exactly where they were born. But what we do know is this: audiences didn't just marvel at their appearance. They adored their presence. They had an innocence about them. Their joy was infectious, and those who worked alongside them said they brought light backstage, not just under the big top. Pip and Flip found their place with the Circus of Horrors, and later became known to the world through the film Freaks, a rare cinematic time capsule of real sideshow life. In a world that often exploited, they reminded audiences of something deeper, that joy isn't always measured by convention or intellect. Maurice Tillet. Maurice Tillet was born in 1903 in Russia, and by all accounts looked like any other young boy. But everything changed when he turned 17. Diagnosed with acromegaly, a hormonal disorder causing abnormal bone growth, Maurice's face and hands began to enlarge rapidly. But Maurice didn't shy away. He leaned in. Fluent in 9 languages, a devout Catholic, and even a poet, Maurice moved to France, then to the US, where he became a professional wrestler. His stage name, the French Angel. He wasn't just a curiosity, he was a champion. In the ring, he radiated strength, winning the American Wrestling Association World Heavyweight Championship. Fans loved him, children admired him, and yet beneath the persona, Maurice often battled illness and pain in silence. Before his death in 1954, he agreed to have casts of his face made. Those plaster masks now sit in museums, whispering the legacy of a man who turned hardship into heroism and became a possible inspiration for the animated character Shrek decades later. Johnny Eck. Before CGI, before stunt doubles, there was Johnny Eck, a man who turned disbelief into applause. Nicknamed the Half-Boy, or the Man with No Body, Johnny was born in 1911 with sacral agenesis, a rare condition that left him without functional legs. But Johnny didn't see himself as half of anything. He learned to walk on his hands. Not only walk, but perform acrobatic feats that left crowds breathless. He even played basketball, moving with speed and precision using only his upper body. And unlike many sideshow acts, Johnny had a twin brother, Robert, who supported him both on and off the stage, making their bond part of the act. Outside the tent, Johnny was a Renaissance man. He painted, sculpted, designed miniatures, and even worked as a film actor, most famously in Todd Browning's cult classic Freaks, 1932. He later ran a miniature train attraction in his hometown of Baltimore and lived well into his 70s. Johnny once said, "I'm not a sideshow freak, I'm a performer." But what if your very body was never truly yours to control? The next story isn't just about performance, it's about captivity, sisterhood, and a lifetime of yearning. Annie Jones. Born in Virginia in 1865, Annie Jones had a full beard by the time she was 5, a result of hirsutism, likely caused by a hormonal imbalance. That same year, she began her career with P.T. Barnum, labeled the Bearded Girl. Unlike many sideshow acts, Annie wasn't silent. As she matured, she became an outspoken advocate for performers like herself, publicly objecting to the term freak and fighting for respect and fair treatment within the industry. She toured Europe, appeared on stage in elegant Victorian dresses, and demanded to be seen as more than just facial hair. Annie married twice, and her grace and wit earned her admiration from fans and fellow performers alike. Though she passed away in 1902 at just 37, her legacy endured, not just as a sideshow star, but as a woman who refused to be reduced to her difference. Susie. In a world obsessed with appearances, Susie was born with ichthyosis, a rare skin condition that causes extreme dryness, thickening, and scaling of the skin. To the sideshow crowd, she was known by cruel nicknames like Alligator Girl or Elephant Skin Woman. But to those who knew her, she was a fighter, Her skin constantly cracked, bled, and required meticulous care. Still, she stood under the harsh lights of the circus, allowing strangers to gawk, not out of vanity but survival. Sideshows offered something no one else did: employment and a place to belong. Susie turned her condition into a presentation, educating some, entertaining others. But it was never easy. Constant physical discomfort accompanied her, and the emotional toll of being objectified could never be ignored. From skin as armor to hair as a spectacle, our next story takes us deep into the jungles of perception and a disturbing pseudoscientific past. Crowfarini. Imagine being a child and being told you were a bridge between apes and humans. That's how Crowfarini, born in 1876 in Laos, was introduced to Western audiences. She had hypertrichosis, a condition causing excessive hair growth all over her face and body. But instead of compassion, the Victorian era wrapped her in the grotesque theory of evolution as spectacle. Labeled the missing link, she was displayed in Europe and America as proof of Darwin's ideas, pushed not by science but by profiteers like P.T. Barnum. Dressed in tribal costumes, Crow was told to grunt, pose, and stay silent. But behind the scenes, she was fluent in several languages and was said to be witty, articulate, and observant. She remained in show business well into adulthood and passed away in Brooklyn in 1926. By then, she had become a sideshow veteran, but more importantly, a woman who had lived her entire life under a label she never chose. Dominique Castagna. Little is remembered about Dominique Castagna, but in the early 20th century, he was one of many sideshow performers billed as the living skeleton. Dominique weighed less than 70 pounds and stood tall, his ribcage starkly outlined beneath paper-thin skin. His condition, possibly caused by tuberculosis or a wasting disorder, made him appear otherworldly. He performed by simply standing still, a silent statement of physical extremity. Often paired with fat ladies for contrast, his role was to shock, to create imbalance, to make the crowd wonder, how can he be alive? Frankie Saluto. Frankie Saluto stood just 3 feet tall, but on the circus stage he towered over the crowd with charm and wit. As a white-faced clown with Ringling Brothers, Frankie was beloved not for his difference, but for his brilliance. He carried a live rabbit on stage, delighted kids with slapstick, and even wowed adults with a dead-on Charlie Chaplin impersonation. Audiences didn't laugh at Frankie, they laughed with him. Unlike many other performers in this list, Frankie's story is light, joyful, and even inspiring. He embraced performance fully, retiring with dignity and being remembered as one of the greatest little clowns in circus history. He proved that difference doesn't have to mean despair, it can be celebration. Josephine Myrtle Corbin. Born in 1868 in Tennessee, Josephine Myrtle Corbin stunned doctors and sideshow promoters alike. She had a rare congenital condition called dipagus, which resulted in 2 separate pelvises and 4 legs, 2 normal-sized and 2 smaller ones. Myrtle joined sideshows at a young age, billed as the 4-legged girl from Texas. The posters drew crowds. The reality? A kind, soft-spoken young woman who used her difference as a means of self-sufficiency. But Myrtle didn't stay on stage forever. She eventually retired and married a doctor. Astonishingly, she gave birth to 5 children, a biological feat made possible by her unique anatomy. Her life defied every expectation, not just medically but socially. In a world that saw her as odd, Myrtle built a quiet life of motherhood, marriage, and dignity. Her story proves that even the most extreme physical difference can still cradle the most universal human experiences: love, family, and resilience. Frances O'Connor. Imagine brushing your hair, writing a letter, sipping a glass of water, all with your feet. That was the everyday reality of Frances O'Connor, a woman born in 1914 without arms. But what could have been a quiet, isolated life became a bold journey into the spotlight. At just 15 years old, Frances joined the Ringling Brothers Circus, where she amazed audiences not with tricks or exaggeration, but with real, lived skill. She ate, sewed, drank, and even applied makeup using only her toes. She lived with her mother in Sheridan, Wyoming, and traveled extensively across the U.S. Her act didn't rely on exaggeration or discomfort. It relied on admiration. Frances didn't perform as a freak. She performed as proof of human adaptability and strength. She later married and quietly retired from the circus world, but her legacy lives on as one of grace and independence. Pauline Musters. Born in the Netherlands in 1876, Pauline Musters stood only 21.8 inches tall, earning her a place in the Guinness World Records as the shortest woman to have ever lived. But don't let her size fool you. Pauline was a giant in talent. Trained as an acrobat and dancer, she captivated audiences across Europe with her elegant footwork, balancing acts, and spirited personality. Nicknamed Princess Pauline, she toured Paris, London, and even New York. But fame came with risk. Traveling in the late 19th century as a medically fragile person meant constant exposure to illness. In 1895, just 2 days into her U.S. debut, Pauline died of pneumonia and meningitis. She was only 19. Her passing stunned the press. Obituaries mourned her not as a curiosity, but as an artist, proof that in her short life, Pauline had earned admiration that reached far beyond her frame. Grace McDaniels. Grace McDaniels was born in 1888 with Sturge-Weber syndrome, a condition that caused severe facial birthmarks and deformities. To a society obsessed with appearances, she was labeled the mule-faced woman. But behind the stage name was a woman with dignity, love, and grit. In the 1930s, she joined Harry Lewiston's traveling circus, where she earned enough to support herself and her son, Elmer. She became a loyal performer, often refusing photo ops that felt degrading and insisting that her son receive an education. Those who knew her described Grace as soft-spoken, intelligent, and fiercely maternal. She wasn't looking for pity. She was looking for a place where she and her son could survive. Upon her death in 1958, Elmer buried her in her hometown with a simple gravestone, far from the bright lights, but close to the home she always loved. Alice Elizabeth Doherty. Born in Minneapolis in 1887 with hypertrichosis lanuginosa, Alice Elizabeth Doherty entered the world covered in fine, silvery blonde hair, like a newborn mammal. By the age of 5 months, she was already being exhibited in storefronts and expositions. Dubbed the Minnesota Woolly Girl, Alice never chose the spotlight. It was chosen for her. Her parents, seeing a unique opportunity, displayed her for profit, touring the Midwest through traveling shows. Her condition, while harmless, made her a constant object of fascination. Yet Alice was known to be sweet-tempered, intelligent, and fond of reading, traits often ignored by promoters who focused solely on her fur-like appearance. She eventually retired from performing in her early 20s and led a quieter life, away from gawking crowds. Her story is bittersweet, a reflection of a child who grew up on display and who finally claimed her own space off stage. Lavery Valley. Known to the public as Charmian, Lavery Valley was a professional trapeze artist with a bold twist. In the early 1900s, when modesty ruled public life, Lavery had the audacity to strip while swinging on a trapeze. Yes, you read that right. Her act began in a full Victorian dress. As she swung, she removed layer after layer, petticoats, bodice, gloves, until she revealed a form-fitting leotard beneath. The crowd? Shocked, entranced, delighted. But Charmian's act was more than titillation. It was performance art. In a time when women couldn't vote, she dominated the air with elegance and power. Even Thomas Edison filmed her in 1901, capturing her aerial striptease as a novelty, and perhaps unknowingly as a feminist statement. She redefined what a female performer could be, and the echoes of her defiance still ring through stages today. Millie and Christine McCoy. Born conjoined in 1851 in North Carolina, Millie and Christine McCoy entered the world under the cruel weight of slavery. They were sold as infants and passed between showmen like commodities, but within them bloomed astonishing resilience. Connected at the base of their spines, the twins learned to walk, dance, speak multiple languages, and sing in perfect harmony. They were billed as the two-headed nightingale, and eventually became stars on both sides of the Atlantic. After emancipation, they took greater control of their careers and earnings, an extraordinary feat for formerly enslaved, disabled women in the 19th century. Fedor Jeftichuk. Fedor Jeftichuk was born in Russia in 1868 with hypertrichosis, like Crow, but his story took a more theatrical path. Under the care of his showman father, Fedor toured Eastern Europe before being discovered by P.T. Barnum, who renamed him Jojo the Dog-Faced Boy. On stage, Fedor barked, growled, and snarled, following a character forced upon him by Barnum's marketing machine. The hair on his face, ears, and arms was real. The performance? Manufactured. But audiences adored him. Offstage, Fedor was shy and polite. He spoke multiple languages and enjoyed reading. Sadly, he died of pneumonia at just 36. His story, however, lived on. Decades later, Fedor's look reportedly inspired the design of Chewbacca in Star Wars, a pop culture icon that echoes his unforgettable face. He may have been billed as beastly, but Fedor was all human, kind, intelligent, and misunderstood. Mary Ann Bevan. Born in Britain in 1874, Mary Ann Bevan led a quiet life, working as a nurse, marrying a loving man, and raising children. But after her husband's untimely death, everything changed. Mary began to develop symptoms of acromegaly, which caused her face and body to enlarge and harden. Now widowed and visibly changed, she struggled to support her 4 children. In desperation, she entered a Ugliest Woman contest and won. That victory brought offers from circuses and sideshows. Though dehumanizing, Mary took the work, not for fame, but to feed her family. She toured throughout Europe and America, often smiling despite cruel whispers. Behind the headlines was a mother who did what she had to do, and though newspapers mocked her, many in the audience admired her resilience. Mary died in 1933, having endured more cruelty than most ever will. But today, she is often remembered not with ridicule, but with respect. Pansy Chinery. In the early 1900s, aerial acts were all the rage, but few dared to do what Pansy Chinery, known by her stage name Ed E. Iana, pulled off. Literally. Pansy was an aerialist who suspended herself from trapezes using only her teeth, spinning and swinging high above the crowd with no safety net. It was terrifying and mesmerizing. Audiences screamed, some turned away, but Pansy held firm, jaw clenched on a leather grip or steel ring, trusting her strength and her timing. Little is known about her life outside the tent, but her act became legendary during World War I-era circuses. She symbolized more than daredevilry. She symbolized female strength in a time when women were expected to stay grounded. Bill Dirks. Born in Alabama in 1913, Bill Dirks had a cleft palate and a severe facial deformity that gave the impression of 2 noses and an exaggerated central forehead. But in his 40s, rather than hiding away, Bill turned his face into a brand. Using makeup, prosthetics, and a clever trick of illusion, he rebranded himself as the man with 3 eyes and 2 noses. While the 3rd eye wasn't real, the crowd didn't care. His act fit the tone of mid-century sideshows, mystery over medical truth. But Bill wasn't just a gimmick. He found love within the sideshow circuit, marrying fellow performer Mildred, known as the alligator-skinned woman. The couple traveled together, worked together, and even appeared on sideshow posters as a dynamic duo. Bill's story is a reminder that sometimes embracing your difference is the path to freedom and to love. Eli Bowen. Born in 1844 with phocomelia, Eli Bowen had no legs and shortened arms. But what he lacked in limb length, he made up for in pure upper body strength. Dubbed the legless acrobat, Eli stunned audiences in the late 1800s by flipping, spinning, balancing, and even performing on parallel bars, all with his torso and arms. Audiences came expecting pity. They left inspired. He was a regular performer for major American circuses and was widely admired, even outside the tent. P.T. Barnum personally championed him as a marvel of perseverance and ability. Eli married, had 4 children, and maintained a stable family life, an exceptional achievement for a sideshow star of his era. His resilience, both on stage and at home, made him a symbol of triumph, not tragedy. Now let's meet someone who didn't have arms or legs, yet found ways to move, to work, and to shine. Aloysia Wagner. Born in Germany in the early 1900s, Aloysia Wagner, known by her stage name Violetta, was born without arms or legs due to tetra amelia syndrome. But even without limbs, she refused to be helpless. With the support of her half-brother, she emigrated to the United States and joined the sideshow circuit, where she was introduced as the beautiful Venus without arms and legs. And indeed, she was beautiful. She combed her hair, dressed herself, wrote, and even sewed, using only her mouth. Her act stunned audiences not because of her condition, but because of what she did in spite of it. It was a performance of skill, control, and quiet rebellion against expectations. Joseph Merrick. Born in Leicester, England in 1862, Joseph Merrick suffered from severe deformities believed today to be caused by Proteus syndrome and neurofibromatosis. His head grew to 3 times normal size, his skin thickened, and his right arm enlarged beyond function. He became a sideshow act across Britain under the name The Elephant Man. But Joseph wasn't grotesque. He was gentle, poetic, and brilliant. He loved Shakespeare, built cathedral models from paper, and longed for simple dignity. After years of cruel exhibition, he found refuge at London Hospital, where he was cared for and treated with respect. Joseph's story reached the world through David Lynch's 1980 film, which captured the emotional truth beneath the spectacle. His quiet plea, spoken in real life and echoed on screen, still haunts history. I am not an animal, I am a human being. Edouard Beaupré. Born in Saskatchewan in 1881, Edouard Beaupré grew faster than anyone in his small town. By age 9, he was over 6 feet tall. By 21, he stood a staggering 7 feet 8 inches, making him one of the tallest people on record. But Edouard wasn't just tall, he was strong. Before joining the circus, he worked as a ranch hand and could lift a full-grown horse onto his shoulders. Soon, he was recruited by Barnum and Bailey, becoming a star attraction for his size, strength, and quiet charm. He also wrestled professionally, earning respect beyond the spectacle. Sadly, he died young in 1904 from tuberculosis, just 23 years old. His body was displayed for years without consent, until it was finally returned to his hometown for a proper burial. A final act of dignity for a man whose life was lived on display. Teo Valenzuela. Weighing an astonishing 645 pounds, Teo Valenzuela earned the title, heaviest man in the world. But behind that headline was a man navigating life in a body that often brought him pain as well as public curiosity. Teo became a local celebrity, performing in small traveling shows and county fairs. At a time when obesity was misunderstood and often ridiculed, Teo offered himself to the public gaze, for livelihood and perhaps for a sense of identity. Everyday life wasn't easy. Walking, dressing, sleeping, each task came with its own challenges. But when Teo appeared on stage, he carried his weight with surprising confidence and even humor, sometimes joking with the crowd about his size. Unzi. In the early 20th century, when science had yet to demystify conditions like albinism, Unzi was billed as the albino man and became a sensation in the US and abroad. Born with a lack of pigment in his skin, hair, and eyes, Unzi stood out and was recruited early into the circus world. His startling appearance, pale skin, white lashes, nearly translucent hair, drew crowds fascinated by what they didn't understand. Promoters leaned into the mystery, claiming he had magical powers or came from a distant, icy land. But Unzi was no ghost. He was a professional. He performed with Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus, always punctual, polite, and well-spoken. Behind the act was a man who endured bright lights and flashing cameras that caused him physical discomfort, particularly because albinism often comes with visual sensitivity. Yet, he performed, he endured, and in doing so, he paved the way for greater visibility of people with albinism, even as he remained a curiosity in his time. Grady Stiles Jr. Grady Stiles Jr. was born in 1937 with ectrodactyly, a genetic condition that fuses fingers and toes into claw-like shapes. In the sideshow world, he was known as Lobster Boy, and he wasn't the first. His family had a long line of performers with the same condition. Grady performed for decades, crawling across the stage with his powerful upper body. But behind the curtain, his life unraveled. He struggled with alcoholism and domestic abuse, and in 1978, he shocked the world by murdering his daughter's fiancé with a shotgun. Despite his crime, courts gave him house arrest, citing his physical condition. He later remarried, but the violence didn't stop. In 1992, his wife and son hired a hitman to kill him. Grady was murdered in his home, bringing a tragic, violent end to a life already haunted by pain and dysfunction. John Jennings. In the early 1900s, few names echoed through circus grounds like John Jennings, the man billed as the modern Samson. With bulging muscles and biblical branding, Jennings didn't rely on his looks or unusual anatomy. He relied on pure strength. His signature act? Bending steel bars with his bare hands, pulling carts with ropes attached to his chest. Once, he reportedly even held back 2 galloping horses with each arm, muscles rippling as the crowd gasped. But John wasn't just a performer. He was a symbol of unyielding power during a time when masculinity and myth often collided. His strongman act toured across state fairs and European exhibitions. Offstage, he was quiet and disciplined, training rigorously to ensure each feat was authentic. George and Willie Muse. Born in late 19th century Virginia, George and Willie Muse were African-American brothers with albinism, a rare condition made even more striking by their black heritage. But their story didn't begin under the circus lights, it began with tragedy. In 1899, the boys were kidnapped from their mother by circus promoters who renamed them Echo and Eco, branding them as Martian ambassadors or sheep-headed cannibals from Ecuador. They were exhibited across the US and Europe for decades, told their mother was dead. They weren't just exploited for their appearance, their identities were erased, but their mother, Harriet Muse, never stopped searching. After more than 20 years, she miraculously recognized them in a circus poster and launched a legal battle. She won, not only their freedom, but their back pay and legal guardianship. Afterward, George and Willie continued to perform on their own terms, playing music and living peacefully in their later years. So, we have journeyed together through a haunting path, from the glamorous thrones of Europe to ancient tombs in Egypt, and even frightening hidden corners in modern society. These stories all share one common thread: the pursuit of power, purity, or simply survival through isolation has woven these tragic and complex narratives. If today's journey into the profound impact of extreme inbreeding has intrigued, shocked, or made you reflect, please show your support. Hit the like button, leave your thoughts or questions in the comment section below, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel. We will see you in the next videos. Thank you.